Hello and welcome to the Hey Boomer Show. My name is Wendy Green and I am your host for Hey Boomer. And Hey Boomer is the show for those of us who believe that we are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. Today, our show is going to be about financial planning, in a sense, because there's more to financial planning than just, making sure you have enough money to retire. Although that is a very good strategy, something you all want to think about when you are talking with your financial planners. But we're going to talk about more than that. Bradley Clark, who is my guest today, is a certified financial planner and a retirement income. I have that written down somewhere else, so I'll talk about that in a minute. But Bradley has written a book called Be the Bird. And in the book, he talks about some of the important aspects of financial planning that you may not always think about, things like confidence and optimism and resilience. Of course, he also talks about how you build your portfolio. He talks about tax implications. He talks about building your portfolio and then how do you start withdrawing from your portfolio when it's time for retirement. But there is more to it than just the money side of things. So I can assure you this is going to be an interesting conversation. I like Brad's outlook on how you build your portfolio and how you look at your life as a whole. So we will get into that more. Before we get there, I do want to thank our sponsor, Rhodes Scholar, for their support of Hey Boomer. As you know, Rhodes Scholar is the leader in not-for-profit travel for people over 55 and for grandparents with their grandchildren. And they travel to all 50 states in the United States, as well as over 100 countries. It is definitely my favorite way to travel. This summer, I have 2 Rhodes Scholar trips planned. The first one is the trip I am hosting to Costa Rica in June. We still have a couple of spots left on that trip. It's pretty much full, but if you're interested, you can always drop me an email at wendy@heyboomer.biz, and I can send you some more information about the trip. You can find Rhodes Scholar, and I definitely want you to support them as a sponsor of Hey Boomer by going to Road, ROAD, scholar.org/heyboomer. So go take a look at some of the trips that you might want to schedule for the rest of this year or 2024. I also want to mention 2 resources that you might find on my webpage. The first is the Vitality Assessment. And the Vitality Assessment will give you insights into whether you are fully vitalized, whether you have sustained energy, maybe your cup is just half full right now, or maybe it's time to take stock and really look at what you need to change in your life to again become fully vitalized. You can download the Vitality Assessment by clicking on the link at heyboomer.biz, B-I-Z, and you will get access to that Vitality Assessment. I'd be curious to know what you find out. The other thing I want to mention is that I have 2 new coaching cohorts that will be starting in just a couple of weeks. The first one is going to begin on Saturday morning, April 15th. The second one will begin on Thursday evening, April 20th. Each one of these cohorts runs for 6 weeks, and it kind of builds on the kind of things that Brad will be talking about today. And that once you have your financial plan set, now let's talk about setting your life plan for the next 20 or 30 years of your life. So we're going to look at what's important to you, what roles you've been playing, what roles you want to play, who do you want to be, what do you feel like is going to give you purpose and meaning in this next stage of your life. So go to heyboomer.biz/coaching And you can schedule a 20-minute complimentary coaching call with me to find out more, to find out if this is something that would fit your needs, and sign up for a spot. So I hope to talk to you all soon there. And let me bring Brad on and do a brief introduction. All right. Hi, Brad.
Hi, thank you, Wendy, for having me today.
Glad to have you. I enjoyed the book. So let me tell them a little bit about you. So Bradley Clark started Clark Asset Management in 2016. He was the co-founder of military.com, which was acquired by Monster in 2004. He spent 8 years with the Motley Fool, developing a program that matched investors to solutions based on their own investing styles, needs, and risks. Brad got his BA from Harvard and his MBA from Stanford. He is one of only 3% of advisors who hold both the Certified Financial Planner and the Retirement Income Certified Professional designation. His goal with his firm is to help pre-retirees replace their financial anxiety with relaxed confidence about their future, and to help retirees navigate the decumulation phase. Is there anything that I left out, Brad?
That's pretty good. Thank you so much for the summary.
Okay. So the book, Be the Bird. Tell me about that metaphor.
Wow. So that's a great question. I started off trying to write a book about retirement planning and then realized there's 1,000 or 5,000 of those. So that's not in and of itself interesting. But then I started playing around with some positive psychology concepts and stories from my own life. And I kind of put those as an afterthought in the second part of the book, and I had a bunch of people read it. And the feedback I got from the beta readers was the big idea. This is the big idea in this book. This is actually a book about confidence, right? And confidence specifically as we head into retirement, maybe starting 5 years prior, as we reposition for retirement, as we head into retirement, and as we live in retirement. And I became fascinated with confidence because I had always been confident, but then lost my confidence through a series of failures, basically, and realized I didn't have the stores of resilience to quickly get back up on the proverbial horse. And so that was a tough period for me, but it sent me down what ultimately were some productive paths around the importance of confidence and the importance of resilience and optimism and all these other beautiful ideas, which I had always been kind of a cynic about, frankly. And in any case, we bumped into a quote from a guy named Charlie Wardle about a bird who, and I forget the exact quote, but the essence of it is that a bird, when a bird comes to rest on a branch, it's not confident in the branch as much as it's confident in its wings and in itself. So if the branch happened to break under the bird's weight or for some other reason, the bird is actually placing confidence in itself. And the quote struck me and struck some readers, and then we decided to call the book Be the Bird, which is pretty aspirational, but we do have a subheadline that's much more descriptive about financial planning, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, that's a long-winded answer.
But that's what I loved about it. When I first got your book, I was like, Be the Bird. What does that have to do with financial planning? But it has so much to do with it, because if you don't feel that confidence in your plan, then it makes it a lot harder to make that next step into retirement.
Yeah. I think that's right. I go ahead. Sorry.
No, so I appreciated that you opened the door to the discussion about how you lost your confidence, because I do think, as your readers said, that is the essence of the book. That's what makes this different than regular financial planning books. So if you'll go into that a little bit more about how you lost it, and more importantly, how you found it again.
Yeah, and I'll keep this brief, but I think it is important for. It's interesting if you can weave a couple of personal stories through a book about financial planning. I do think it makes it more readable and approachable. So I basically had 37, I would say, uninterrupted years of achievement from age 0 to age 37. Whether that's measured in the types of, elite universities I attended, or the number of times I was promoted, or the compensation levels, or the responsibilities at work, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And achievement had always been important to me, and so I think I always valued myself based on my achievements. And then when I was 37, some things started to happen. I had relocated to New Hampshire and I was working by myself out of my basement. So I was isolating and not even thinking about that. And that had a deleterious effect. Then I finally got a local job for far less pay in a nonprofit and was fired because, that's not a culture that where I will thrive, right? It's just a much more genteel and softer kind of work culture, and it really wasn't appropriate for my style. So I managed to get myself fired. And so those two things plus a couple of others, really made me I started to lose my professional identity. And I think I learned the hard way that that's how I was defining myself, my own self-worth was through my achievements.
Mm-hmm.
And then, it was tough. But then I started to read, and I bumped into some books that you could argue saved my life, like Mindset by Carol Dweck from Stanford. And I recognized in myself a fixed mindset instead of a growth mindset. And I just started to play around with these ideas like self-esteem and confidence and resilience, and where do these things actually come from? And by studying that stuff, I was able to start to lay down some of those tracks for my own recovery, if you will. And then fast forward a couple of years, I ended up forming this firm and started working with pre-retirees, and never lost the emphasis, and started reading about what happens to confidence in our lives. And what I'm about to say is a gross generalization, but some people have studied confidence throughout life. And confidence tends to build through our 20s, 30s, and 40s, and often kind of peak at 50 or 60, because that's tends to be the peak of we're very healthy, we're not elderly yet, we're probably in peak earning years, we have the most influence at work. There's all these things that are kind of like tailwinds for confidence. And then when you start to slow down and retire, if you're not careful, you know, uh, confidence can really start to degrade. And it can degrade because of physical changes, it can degrade because of cognitive changes, it can degrade because maybe you are um, more isolated than when you were working with others. If you're not bringing income in, if you don't have power and recognition anymore, all of those things can degrade confidence. And then if the stock market falls by 30 or 40%, and now you see your portfolio hammered, that maybe just then heightens anxiety and insecurity, which it's tough to be confident when those things happen. And so since my target my clients tend to be 55 plus, I actually think that I've decided that the business I'm in is not the financial planning and investment management business. I'm actually in the business of helping my clients achieve and maintain the feeling of relaxed confidence throughout for the rest of their lives. I just happen to bring, an immensely detailed and rigorous financial architecture to that question. So yes, we perform these services, but ultimately the benefit is the feeling of relaxed confidence.
Yeah, and I think you made some really valid points. I can't remember the name of the book right now. It was written by a man out of UPenn, but he also talked about the fact that confidence degrades as we get older, and for a variety of reasons. And I think financial confidence is an important foundation. But I think there's, as you allude to in the book, there's more to that. There's the intrinsic confidence that we build in ourselves through some of the work that you did when you were recovering, as you say. Um, but part of the book also talks about the resilience that you have to build when you're looking at your next 30 years or so of not maybe bringing in an income, and the stock market goes up or down, or someone gets sick, or you have a divorce or a death or these kinds of things. You went through a lot of talk about risk and coined the phrase of a chief risk officer for your own life. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so in one of the jobs, actually the job I was fired from, I learned a lot about what chief risk officers do in major corporations. And as the word implies, a chief risk officer is supposed to dispassionately or clinically or objectively inventory all the risks facing their organization, whether it's a corporation or not for profit. Make an inventory or register of those risks, and then assess each one and make decisions about what to do about them. And there's four things you can do about any given risk. You can try to avoid it. You can try to mitigate it. You can just assume it, which means you're not going to change any behavior. You just assume the risk. And the last thing you could do is you can transfer some of that risk to another entity. So those are the four basic ideas. And I started realizing that, again, instead of thinking about what we do as financial planning and investment management, if we click that up a level, another way to think about what we do or what you should do as an individual if you don't hire a financial advisor, some people are perfectly capable of performing this role for themselves, is somebody needs to play the role of chief risk officer in your life. And I mean that more on the financial side, right? I'm
Right.
not talking about the risk of diabetes. I mean, obviously, there's a bunch of non-financial risks, which then could end up having financial implications. But I'm talking about it in the context of financial risks. And in one of my coursework for the RACP, I kind of learned about 12 or 15 significant financial risks that most people face heading into retirement. And I think it's a very powerful way to view things. And risk is not bad. I mean, risk is uncertain, right? It's just uncertainty. And there is no way to drive all the uncertainty to zero in every category. I mean, that's silly. Nobody would. I don't think anybody should try to do that. But you can, or you can with a helper, assess which risks are the most important ones and then decide what to do about them. And I think it's fascinating to counterpoint between that type of thinking and being optimistic, right?
Mm.
Because and we may get into this later, but there's so many proven benefits of being optimistic. And what I've concluded is that if you're not already an optimist, you want to work hard to teach yourself how to become more optimistic. And it makes sense to comport yourself as an optimist the vast majority of the time. But either you or somebody that you hire must occasionally think catastrophically on your behalf. You either think catastrophically for yourself or you outsourced that to somebody who can do that for you. Right. So
Yeah.
so that you can actually do the thinking and the discussions that are unpleasant. I'll just briefly mention, then I'll stop talking for a second. My grandmother passed away, having burned through 2 long-term care insurance policies, and then burning through a significant portion of her estate because she had dementia for such a long period of time. That is uncommon. That is unlikely to happen to someone, but it's absolutely possible. And so the question is, that's a financial risk, long-term care expenses, which Medicare does not cover. The question is not whether that's a risk. The question is, for any individual person, how do they feel about that? What would they do if there was that type of expense? And then we kind of work through it from there.
Yeah. And, I like the idea of outsourcing it, because otherwise I was reading through the book and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to worry about this all the time. So I think your word dispassionate is an important one, because if I can outsource it to someone who can look objectively at it, give me the pros and cons, and help me, reach that optimistic outlook, but also be realistic. I think you have to balance those, don't you?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, this stuff is pretty nuanced. I mean, I always prided myself in my first 37 years of being absolutely realistic. And I used to kind of be cynical about all those Pollyannish optimists who would always say they'd be, somewhere by 4:30 and they'd be there by 5 because they misjudged traffic, or any other silly examples. Um, but I guess I've concluded, live your life as an optimist, but occasionally think realistically or catastrophically. But don't let those things dominate your day.
Yeah, yeah. Because yes, if you turn the news on, you're going to hear all the catastrophic news that you want.
And I'm not, I just want to caveat, I am not a PhD in behavioral economics or psychology, but I've read so much about this. Our brain, on this example you gave, our brains, through the way they evolved, are particularly aware of and interested in negative information. So we, as consumers, love that so much. It means we are essentially demanding from the media that they feed us negative stories, okay? Because that captures our attention and our eyeballs, which then drives the business models of media companies.
Yeah.
So we sit here consuming negative stories because our brains can't get enough of them. Okay, right? Because they used to be threats,
That's
but
right.
this stuff is no longer threats. If a plane crashes in Malaysia, that's different than a tiger rustling in the bushes, 10
Outside.
yards away or 10 yards away from you.
Right.
But our brains are still operating the way that they were, 100,000 years ago.
Right. We evolved to watch for threats. So I want to get a little practical here now, because I loved this concept of the income floor. That gave me confidence to read about that. So would you talk a little bit about what you mean by the income floor before we get into wants and wishes?
Sure. I need to mention wants and wishes to frame the income floor. So people have probably heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And I have a kind of a dumbed down version of it that I use. It basically says, if you're planning your spending for the rest of your life, with our clients, we really encourage people to plan their spending in three layers: needs, wants, and wishes. So needs are going to be the non-negotiable, non-discretionary basic living expenses. And so for a couple of two, depending on where you are in the country and what your lifestyle is, maybe that's $5,000 a month, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 12. I mean, it really varies by family or couple. And then there's wants and there's wishes. Well, there's some fascinating work that came out in around the year 2000, which suggests that most of us are carrying around two different relationships with investment risk at the same time. So when it comes to our non-discretionary spending, the needs, most of us are actually conservative. We don't want to take risks with that. I mean, if I need to spend, my wife and I need to spend $8,000 a month for the rest of our lives to support the core lifestyle, I want visibility into that. I want some level of assurances. But if we also want to spend 50 grand a year traveling to Tuscany or traveling around the world or buying a second home or whatever, that stuff, that's just wants, like, or wishes. That's discretionary. If that doesn't happen, it's not going to ruin us. Okay.
Right.
So for that second category of spend, most of us are actually much more comfortable with investment risk. So, so we all in this country, assuming we've worked 10 years, all of us will have some income floor, which is called Social Security. Some people are lucky enough to enhance that with a pension from a former employer, although that's getting less common. Okay. So Social Security is a pretty universal piece of an income floor. And then some people are lucky enough to layer in a corporate pension. Well, let's say you have both and they add up to 50 grand a year, but you want to spend 100 grand a year on your on your needs. So in this little example, there's a $50,000 gap between the amount that your core lifestyle costs, your needs. There's a $50,000 gap between that and the Social Security and pension in this little example. So what you can do is take your investable assets and slice a portion of them off and stick them in your income floor, right, to round out or complete the income floor. And there's a lot of different strategies for that. There's bond ladders and MIGAs and income annuities, CD. I mean, the actual tactic or product is less important. But what's very powerful is if you can create line of sight into cash flows to support your basic living expenses that are not in stocks, right? Then our clients love that because there's psychological benefits, behavioral benefits, and some functional benefits. So we're big believers on having a robust income floor, and we believe that is one of the things that you can do to achieve and maintain, this feeling of relaxed confidence.
Absolutely. I loved that idea. I'm talking to my planner about it next month because I like that. It gives me relaxed confidence if I feel like that income is pretty well safe and stable, not going to fluctuate. So that's good. I wanted to switch to talk about taxes, which, everybody's favorite subject. Haha. And it's this is the month for it. So you talk about strategies to avoid, minimize, and defer or maximize after tax future wealth. That was a little bit beyond what I like to think about with financial stuff because I don't like to think about it that much. But you explained it in a way that is much more easily understood. So would you talk about that a little bit, please?
Sure. So taxes are interesting. I mean, I think most of us understand that there's a good reason why we pay taxes. Okay. I'm sure your listeners will disagree on, well, what's fair, and, how much is fair, who should pay how much, what should the government be doing with them. I mean, we can't agree on all of those details, but most people will agree that, taxes are here to stay, and there's good reasons that people would have to pay taxes. Okay. There's also a lot of people who really hate paying them and are so focused on not paying them that sometimes focusing on not paying taxes or minimizing taxes sometimes can suboptimize what in my view what you really should be managing your finances for, right? Because sometimes taxes are a champagne problem, meaning you're paying taxes because you made a bunch of money, right? So just paying taxes in a vacuum is not necessarily bad. Now, accountants are mainly trained to do whatever is necessary to avoid a tax or to defer it, meaning to kick the can down the road on the tax. That is often correct, but it is not always correct. And one of my favorite examples is the example of a Roth conversion. So let's say you retire at 62 and you're not planning to take Social Security till 68. There's a 6-year window there where you're going to be in the lowest tax bracket because your income from work is done and you're not yet on Social Security. During those 6 years, it's likely to make sense to start executing Roth conversions. So converting pre-tax IRA money to Roth during that window so that you can lock in very low tax rates. So you're actually accelerating a tax. So you're not avoiding it, you're not deferring it. You're taking a tax you would have paid in the future and electing to pay it now. But the argument is that you can lock in an incredibly low rate of tax so that you and or your beneficiaries at some point in the future could then avoid paying a much, much, much higher rate of tax on those dollars, right? So I think it's important to frame the problem as you're trying to maximize the after-tax return on your assets. So I think of it as a maximization problem. If you always are trying to avoid or defer taxes or minimize, sometimes you're suboptimizing as against the overall goal, right? Another example is there's some planners out there pitching permanent life insurance as a very attractive component of a retirement plan because the benefits, the death benefits are tax-free. Well, if the rate of return in that policy is 3% and it's tax-free, and the rate of return in some other thing you can do with the money is 6%, but after tax it's 4, I guess the question is, would you rather have 3% with no taxes or 4% after taxes? Anybody would say they would prefer 4, but our brains are so focused on not paying taxes, we may go along with what this life insurance agent is saying just to avoid paying them taxes, even though we're worse off.
Yeah, and that's where you'd need to, I would at least need to come to someone like you and say, I don't understand, help me make sense of this and look at it from both ways. Yeah. So you had talked in here about annuities, Brad, and I've talked to planners and insurance agents and stuff about annuities, and back when my mom and dad were planning, that made sense because the interest on annuities was much higher than it is now. But I'm hearing some talk recently that maybe it's a good thing to look at. So can you explain why it might be a good thing to look at an annuity at this point in our lives?
Yeah. So a couple of caveats on annuities. So first of all, insurance companies manufacture these products. Okay. So it's very important to understand that an annuity is an insurance policy. It's an insurance contract. Okay. So if you own Vanguard ETFs or individual stocks in a brokerage company like Charles Schwab or what have you, you own marketable securities, right? Those are investments. If you own an annuity, that is an insurance contract. Now, where it gets confusing is that some of these insurance contracts really have investment aspects to them. So this is kind of this two-headed hydra, if you will. It's an insurance company that has decided to take an insurance policy and an investment approach and smash them together. When you do that, it creates complexity, and it's harder for the end client to understand it. Because it's been hard to understand it, and because the commission rates on selling these policies have historically been so high, the sales practices of certain annuity salespeople have ended up harming so many consumers over the past 40 years that the entire category of annuities has been hurt. In other words, there's a lot of consumers who would never, if they hear the term annuity, they're going to run for the hills because of the damage done by some of the sales practices. Okay. So that's the first important caveat. For a long time, I stridently agreed with that all annuities were evil. In the past few years, I've softened that stance. I still think the vast majority of annuities are good for the companies that manufacture them, and they're good for the salespeople who distribute them, and not good for the end consumer. But the mistake that I was making was throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There are some very good annuities. There's some annuities now that are commission-free annuities, which means when you strip out all the commission expense, it means the insurance company can make the product more attractive to the end consumer. The best type of annuity that I think somebody who's going to be retiring soon should be looking at is an income annuity. The simplest way to think about this is stroking a check to purchase a pension. Okay. So let's say you retired from the federal government with a $100,000 or $80,000 federal pension. Probably don't need the annuity. Let's say you retired from a company with zero pension, but you've got assets in brokerage accounts or 401ks. All we're talking about doing is taking a slice of those assets and writing a check to an insurance company in exchange for a monthly payment for life. So you're basically just purchasing a pension on the open market. Okay. So I think in this interview, it'd be difficult to go much past that because there's complexity underneath that. But I think that's the way to think about that. And if you live to 102, you win the bet against the insurance company. If you buy it at 65 and get hit by a bus the next year, they win the bet. So it's like any other form of insurance, you're simply making a bet with the insurance company, and that's no different than any other form of insurance.
So you buy it from an insurance company, not from your financial planner. And why would they sell it if they don't make a commission? What's in it for them?
Oh, the financial planner?
No, the insurance company.
Oh, I'm sorry. The insurance company makes money in the product. I'm just saying that they traditionally, the sales force, they haven't employed their own sales force. So,
okay.
So they've been giving significant. Let's say you put 500 grand into one of these things that does have a commission. The agent that's usually not an employee of the insurance company. The agent, the financial planner in quotes, is going to make about $40,000 on that sale. So if I convince you, Wendy, to buy this $500,000 income annuity, and if I'm your financial planner and I convince you to do that, if I'm getting a taste, if I'm getting the commission, once you sign that document, I'm getting a check for 40 grand. So that gives me a significant incentive, obviously, to encourage you to buy that product, whether it's in your best interest or not. Right? In my firm, we don't make any, we don't earn any commissions. I mean, you know, and maybe if I come on again, we could talk about this, but the way that your financial advisor is compensated is massively important.
Right. I wanted to ask you about that, in fact.
Yep.
Yeah, because you do have, I mean, the book is How to Avoid the $1 Trillion Wealth Management Shakedown. So you do have a beef with the traditional financial planning methodology.
I'll summarize it very briefly. I work in an industry. Okay. I work in the financial advice industry. A nurse or a dentist or a lawyer or an accountant or a life coach, these folks, or therapists, these folks all work in professions. I'd love to see the financial advice industry become a profession. The only way that will happen is if we clean up the compensation models in the financial advice industry, right? And the two main ways people are paid as financial advisors are commissions for selling products, or they're taking percentages of portfolios. I reject both of those. Our firm is very unusual. We charge a fixed, flat annual fee that's paid quarterly for financial planning and investment management. There are no commissions and there are no percentages. I'm 53 years old. I'm trying to demonstrate to younger advisors that they can set a practice up this way and comport themselves that's much more consistent with this industry becoming a profession someday.
Okay. All right. So that does explain it. Thank you. So we talked about a lot of stuff, Brad. And there's so much more in the book, Be the Bird. Two things. One is I do like to ask for 2 or 3 takeaways that you would like to leave the audience with based on what we talked about. And then I also want you to talk about the offer that you have for the listening audience.
Cool. So takeaways, I would say, this first one's probably not a big surprise. I think if you're in your 50s or your 60s, I think it's very important to take stock of your level of confidence and play around with the idea of relaxed confidence and think about what that could mean to you and keep your eye on it, because I think it's a big deal. Secondly, there's so many people in their 50s, 60s, 70s who are, I would say, deeply ambivalent about asking for help from a financial professional, which is totally understandable. That ambivalence is understandable because on the one hand, you know you need it. On the other hand, you have no idea who you can trust, and you're skeptical, rightly so, about financial advisors and the financial advice industrial complex. The problem with staying in a permanent state of ambivalence, that's tough. You have to pick a lane. You either need to make sure that you are educated up to the point where you can play these roles on your own behalf, which is fine, or you need to snap out of the ambivalence in the other direction and go down the path of searching around for somebody that it might make sense to work with. So I think that's the second. I would say that's the second kind of takeaway. You said I could just provide the offer?
Yes. So first of all, the website, bradleyclark.com, there's a ton of resources out there. So go check out the website just to educate yourself a little bit more on the whole financial planning world and what's available. But now let's do the offer.
Yeah. So there are 12 5-minute videos on there. And I've gotten some good feedback that I'm taking complex stuff and making it approachable. So one idea would be to watch the videos. Another idea would be to go to the URL bradleyclark/podcast offer. If you go to that page and book a chat with me, it's not a sales call, it's just a chat about these types of strategies. We will then ship out to you a hardcover copy of the book. I don't require a credit card. There's no gotchas. There's no strings. But that's the offer just for people listening to podcasts.
Right, because you said you can't even find that podcast offer if you go to the regular website,
right.
bradleyclark.com.
There's actually no links to that page. The only way to get to that page is to actually key it in, because I'm reserving it just for the audiences or the listeners of podcasts that I appear on.
Right. So it's bradleyclark.com/podcast offer. And, as you've heard, listening to Brad, he is very easy to talk to, very helps to make complex subjects very understandable. So reach out, if nothing else, you'll get an education, you'll get to meet Brad, and you'll get a copy of the book. So reach out, bradleyclark.com/podcast offer slash podcast offer, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah. So let me do a little reminder podcast offer, Asha, without the space between podcast and offer. Okay. Couple of reminders. If you would like to get a copy of the vitality assessment, kind of get a reading on where you are right now, you can download that from heyboomer.biz. It's right there on the homepage, the button to click on for the vitality assessment. If you want to find out more about the upcoming What's Next group coaching cohorts, go to heyboomer.biz/coaching and schedule a 20-minute consultation with me. You can always drop me an email at wendy@heyboomer.biz. And please do not forget our wonderful sponsor, Road, ROAD, roadscholar.org/heyboomer. And it's important to put that /heyboomer on there so they know that you are coming from here, and they will continue to be supportive of us. All right, so next week, how many of you listening are horse lovers? Not me. I was never a horseback rider. but my next guest, next week, she was a horseback rider when she was young, then wasn't a horseback rider for a while, and then started to get back into it. And so she wrote a book called Riders of a Certain Age. Isn't that clever? And it talks about all the kinds of things that you might want to think about flexibility and about exercise and about balance and about equipment. And do you want to buy and rent and lease and all these different things, and how you can also be involved with horses even if you don't want to ride. So she loves it. It could be a fun interview. So come back next week to meet Fran Severn, the author of Riders of a Certain Age. And I always like to leave you with the belief that with the belief that you can live with confidence, live with relevance, and live with passion. And remember, you are never too old to set another goal or dream a new dream. My name is Wendy Green, and this has been Hey Boomer.